We're not recording yet, are we?
Yes, we just started.
Oh, I don't see the start broadcast button. Oh, we started? Okay. No, you're right. I'm sorry, everyone. Hello, my name is Michelle Everson. I'm from The Ohio State University, and I will be moderating today's teaching and learning webinar. And just before we get started, before I introduce you to our speaker, I'm sorry, Lori, but it says attendees still on hold on my screen.
Because mine says this session is being recorded.
Right, but the start broadcast is different.
So I need to start the broadcast, right?
You want me to click it?
Yeah, go ahead.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our March Teaching and Learning webinar. My name is Michelle Everson. I'm from The Ohio State University, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. And before I introduce the speaker, I just want to tell you the logistics of the webinar. If you have any questions as we're going along for our speaker, please go ahead and type those in the questions box, and then I will ask the speaker the questions at the end, or else you can also always raise your hand at the end and we can unmute you and you could talk to our speaker. So I'm really excited to introduce our speaker today. She's a very good friend of mine, Ellen Gundlach from Purdue University, and she'll be talking about statistics and society, updating the curriculum of an introductory statistical literacy course for the modern student. Go ahead, Ellen.
Thanks, Michelle, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to talk to you about my course. I want to introduce to you how my course works. First of all, it's set up as a traditional supplemental course with the large lecture hall and smaller recitations. I also have a fully online section with about 80 students, and I have a flip section where they watch the lectures online, but then once a week we get together for in-class group work and activities. I'm the main instructor for all of these sections, and I have about 10 TAs who help me with the course. I've been teaching this particular course since the spring of 2012, and in the past 3 years my students have changed quite a bit. I've noticed that many of them now have prior statistics experience from other classes, either in high school or here at Purdue. And also, more of them are taking this course to fulfill either the information literacy or the science core curriculum outcome. Purdue has several outcomes everybody has to take. And Stat 113 is one of the few courses that qualifies for 2 of these outcomes. And I also have a lot of international and domestic students who need help formulating and judging logical arguments with scientific evidence and having intelligent discussions. And I find that every single day, all of my students want to understand how this material is relevant to their daily lives and future careers. My students are primarily from liberal arts or from the health sciences. I have very, very few science or engineering students, no math or statistics majors at all. And I think it's really important that we make the distinction between a statistical literacy course and a watered-down intro stats course. These are not the same things at all. I teach a statistical literacy course. That means that where the data comes from and analyzing media stories is much more important to me than having my students do data analysis and calculations. I'm not training future statisticians. I am training consumers of statistics and world citizens. So I spent a lot of time, especially over the past summer, thinking through what can I do to add more value to the course with new concepts and activities, and what would set Stat 113 apart from all of the other introductory statistics courses in the department. So I looked up some definitions of statistical literacy. There's the Deb Rumsey definition that it's being able to take information, explain it, judge it, evaluate it, make decisions based on that information. There's the Tishkovskaya and Lancaster definition that says we need to create educated citizens who understand basic statistical concepts and interpret and critically evaluate statistical messages so that they can detect any misuse of statistics by policymakers, physicians, and others. And my favorite, which is a very old one from Thomas Carlyle, a judicious man uses statistics not to get knowledge, but to save himself from having ignorance foisted upon him. I want to save my students from having ignorance foisted upon them. And of course, if you look at the GAZE guidelines, in order to produce statistically literate students, we should emphasize statistical literacy and develop statistical thinking, use real data and stories, stress conceptual understanding rather than just the procedures, and foster active learning. So I kept all of this in mind when I redesigned my course. The name of Stat 113 is Statistics and Society, and I decided to put much more emphasis on the society part of that title. So I wanted to bring in some hot topics from our society today and talk about how they're connected to statistics. So one of the topics I discussed is the difference between placebo effect and nocebo effect. Placebo effect is when your brain tricks your body into having a good reaction to something that isn't there. Nocebo is when your brain tricks your body into having a bad reaction to something that isn't there. And here in central Indiana, we have lots of wind turbines in the fields all around the campus area. And so one of the examples we use is talking about, is wind turbine syndrome a real thing? In case you're wondering, it's not. But one of the examples I use is this fantastic video from the Colbert Report, where he discusses wind turbine syndrome and what the evidence is for and against that. I talk about the ethics of doing experiments with humans. And so that's the standard one that we see in a lot of textbooks, but I make sure that I talk about the Facebook experiment that hit the news in a big way this past summer. And I also talk about the ethics of doing experiments with animals, and that includes the 3 R's of ethical experiments with animals. That's replacement, reduction, and refinement. And whether we like it or not, we all benefit in some way from research with animals, so we should at least understand how that can happen in a good way. I talk about the link between autism and vaccines and whether there's causation there or not. We talk about whether an advertiser's claims are valid, including whether you can trust Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz had to testify in front of Congress fairly recently, and it did not go so well for him. I introduced a big data unit. We talk about interpreting medical test results, including pregnancy tests, with false positives and false negatives and what that means. We talk about cancer clusters in relation to statistical significance, and if you have a cancer cluster, what does that mean, what does that not mean? And I also introduced a service learning project with our campus concert planning group. I used the More and Not Statistics, Concepts and Controversies book for this course, and here's how I've broken up the topics by exam. Some of these, like big data, they're not in SCC right now. So as I was thinking about these new topics that I wanted to discuss, I was trying to figure out how I could assess my students on these topics. And it was a balancing act because I want these open-ended creative projects where my students can really show what they've learned. But I also have 500 students split between traditional, flipped, and online, and we've got to grade these things. So I came up with several projects that I think create a good balance. I've also found it's really hard to come up with good exam questions for some of these topics, so I have to be comfortable with the projects being the main assessments for some of these. So the first project that I use is the advertisement presentation. We do this in groups. And each group has to give a presentation using PowerPoint that takes no more than 5 minutes. And so the flipped and the traditional students do this in class. The online students have to do a 5-minute video recording that they post to Blackboard. And they have to answer these questions. They have to find an advertisement that makes a specific claim about a product. And then they have to do some research, maybe through fine print at the bottom of the ad or on the advertiser's website, to figure out why the advertiser is allowed to make this claim. And then I make them find an outside resource that talks about the same issue. So that could be Consumer Reports, that could be another advertiser making, or for a competitor's product making a different claim. And I have them tell me what they think is true. Do they believe the advertiser or not, and why? And do they think there are any lurking variables that might be involved, common response, confounding? And I want to give a special thanks to Rose Martinez-Dawson for her 2 ECOTS presentations in 2012 and 2014, because that helped set me on the right track for this project. So the students love this project. And here are just a couple comments that are typical from what I see. basically until this project, they assumed that if it was on TV for an ad, it had to be true because somebody in the government would protect them from things that weren't totally true. And now they know that they have to take that upon themselves to do the investigation and make up their own mind about whether to believe it or not. And they also learned it's really tricky to find out information about a product. The websites don't necessarily have a lot of information, so why aren't they making that information available? Okay, let's talk about the big data unit. I helped moderate some of the sessions for ECOTS 2014, and about a third of the talks were about how we should all be teaching big data, whether it's the analytical techniques or the concepts, to our undergraduates. And I was so excited about this, but there's not much information about how to bring that to a statistical literacy class. I definitely can't have them analyzing these big data sets. That's not even what my class is about. But this is a hot topic in our modern world, and they're going to benefit from this. They could be harmed by it. They need to be aware of how their own data is being collected, used, and protected or not protected. Again, there were no prepared materials available, so I had to do a lot of reading of articles meant for other audiences, books meant for other audiences, and I had some great email conversations with Rob Gould and Nick Horton after ECOTS to get their opinions too. And my own IT people here on campus were pretty good resources for this. So after doing lots and lots of reading last summer, I felt like the most important points I wanted to get across to my students were that big data is neither good nor bad. It's neither ethical nor unethical. I'm not trying to scare or outrage my students with this unit, but I am trying to introduce them to the concept of big data and to show them some of the great things that big data can accomplish, make them aware of how much data they produce every day, and empower them to ask questions about who collects their data, how they're going to use it, and what are they doing to protect your privacy. As a society, we're still working out the rules for big data, and it's kind of the Wild West out there. We're all affected by it, and we all contribute to it, but we don't necessarily know what it is or how best to manage it. And I try to help them to see that data is a currency just like gold or cash. Data itself is neither good nor bad, ethical nor unethical, but how it's collected and how it's used makes all the difference. My students are fascinated by the concept of data brokers. These are companies that basically buy and sell large amounts of data from one company to another company. There's this one data broker who had 3,000 data categories for nearly every individual American consumer. That's you. They have 3,000 data categories for you. If you had to explain 3,000 pieces of information about yourself to somebody else, could you do that? Can you even think of what those 3,000 data categories might be? It blows your mind to think about that. And there's also no current way for a consumer to correct errors. You might have trouble getting insurance if several data points point to you being a motorcycle rider, even if you've never been on one in your life. Your insurance company could just think you're lying about that because all the other data says you must ride motorcycles, and that can be a problem for consumers. The Federal Trade Commission, you might think, would be able to protect us from these problems, but they have very little control over this data collection and data use because in this case the consumer is not the customer, we are the product. So we need to come up with all new rules for this. I show them the story about how Target knew that a teenage girl was pregnant before her father did based on all the data that they collect about us and what we buy from Naked Statistics. I talked to the students about what our government might know about them. For example, in May of last year, there was a proposal for a detailed database of all college students, and basically if you agreed to apply for federal aid, you were giving the government permission to have lots and lots of information about you, including your health records, your permanent record from elementary school, that would go there too. It's great for research purposes, but it's bad because you don't know how they're going to protect your data. And also, are you truly able to give informed consent if the only way for you to get federal aid is to agree to turn over all this data, but you can't go to college if you don't get federal aid? So, there's kind of some ethical issues that need to be considered there. We talk about some of the things that they can do with big data when you incorporate your cell phone into your health care. And so there are privacy concerns with this, but there are also benefits, like this Ginger.io app that some doctors are using. Your phone will keep track of who you're with, how long you spend with them, how much communicating you do, where you go, when you sleep, and it's going to transmit all of that information straight to your healthcare provider. And if you're having a hard time or your phone thinks that you might be depressed, it could actually send out information to your friends and family member letting them know that your phone is worried about you and can help you. So there are good things and bad things for that, but we spend some time looking at Ginger.io's privacy policy and talking about whether it's worth the risk to have all that information collected and whether they would feel comfortable with that or not. There are educational uses of big data. Every time you get on Blackboard, there's data being collected about you, but does the college administration necessarily let the students know that their academic behaviors are being tracked? And what do those companies do with our data? Companies like Pearson or Freeman, when you use the ebook, they're tracking you. You know, we don't really give the students a choice about using those sites, but do the students know what information they're giving away? And who owns this data? Does the student own their data? Does the university own it? Does the company own it? And can they sell it? Who gets to decide what is done in the student's best interest? And it's in the news daily. I mean, every single day you will find some kind of article about big data, whether it's a brand new fantastic use or a privacy concern. Just last week when I was putting this presentation together, the Washington Post had an article about how the White House is trying to draft a new consumer privacy bill, but there's lots of criticism about it. We still don't necessarily have rules for this. Some people love that you can record so much data about yourself. Nicholas Felton is part of the Quantified Life community, where these people really, really enjoy collecting data about every aspect of their lives. And but Nicholas Felton also wants you to know what's being recorded from you, whether you want it to be or not. So here are just some additional articles that you might find interesting if you're thinking about introducing big data and data privacy to your course. And I also make sure that I end with something positive. So this is a great TED Talk by Ann Milgram, who talks about how big data and smart statistics can help them fight crime and determine who should be released from prison, who should be kept in prison, who's at risk for not showing up for trial, and things like that. So the project that I have for my students that goes along with this is the Data Diary Project, where they have to fill out a 24-hour data diary that tracks their time of day. So what time of day is it? What could possibly be collecting data from you? So did you use your credit card for a purchase? Did you search on Google for something? Did you use Blackboard? Did you walk somewhere with your phone so the GPS could track you? Did you send a text? What type of data was collected from you? And what's the most concerning data that's being collected from you? Why does it concern you? And I also tell them to pick one of the places that got data from them in that 24-hour period and go read the full privacy policy for that site. Because all of us just click OK without ever reading the privacy policy. And so we don't even know what we're giving away. And so my students were shocked when they read their first privacy policy. I asked them to pay attention to whether it specifically lists which pieces of information the company collects from them, and if so, what are they? And also, how is it being protected? Are they going to sell your data to somebody else? And I have them search online to learn how big data is improving something that interests you, like health, sports, farming, shopping, entertainment. You can find it. There's plenty of information out there. And then I have them finish up by writing a big data privacy bill of rights, where I'm asking my students to come up with what they're okay with, what they're not okay with, for these companies collecting data and how their data should be protected. As a country, we're wrestling with this idea right now, and I want my students to start thinking about it too. Okay, so the students love this project. They feel like their eyes have been opened. They've never read privacy policies before. They think it's, you know, interesting, a little shocking, and fascinating how much companies can learn about them from their data. Okay, and then my service learning project, I partnered with our campus convos group, which plans our big concerts, and they're interested in knowing which groups the students want to have come perform for them. And so I had them I had the convos group make a consulting meeting video for us to talk about what it was they wanted our help with. Basically, they need our help figuring out which artists to bring to campus for the student concerts. The surveys generally have a low response rate and don't represent the student body, and students are unreliable about buying the tickets for shows that they said they wanted to buy tickets for, and so we're trying to get more information about this. So in phase 1, my students worked in groups to collect lists of reasonably priced artists suggested by the student body. And Combos gave us a budget of $100,000 for the artist fees, and they gave us a website to look up the artist fees. And students have to provide a discussion of their sampling methods, potential problems with their methods, whether the sample truly represents the student body, how Combos should contact students and reduce non-response for the official survey later, how Combos can improve consistency between students, what the students say they will do and then what they actually do. I asked them to do a little bit of reflection. What would you do differently if you did this project again? And what did you learn by doing this project that you didn't learn just through lectures or homework? And then in part 2, Combos is going to take our consulting reports that we submitted and create an official online survey to send out to the whole student body. And they're going to take our suggestions for how we thought they could improve the dissemination of the survey. And our students are getting class participation points for participating, and they will hopefully get to attend a concert in the fall of an artist that they helped select. So the students really like this. They found it interesting that it's so hard to do a good survey, to have your wording be clear, to let people know what it is you want, to collect a good sample that was truly representative of the population. Here at Purdue, most of them weren't able to do that so well. They were mostly talking to their friends, but then they realized that that's not the right way to do it. Okay, and then my last project was an article collection and discussion project, and these are 3 variations of the project that I've used. And the system that I use is called Mixable, but it's basically Facebook, but for academic purposes. It's FERPA compliant. There are no ads. Nobody has to be friends with anybody. It's only open to people who are registered to that section. And my students have to post their relevant article and then discuss particular statistics concepts about it, and also make 4 statistically intelligent comments on each other's post. And that's been great for me to see what kinds of topics are interesting to them and where their misconceptions might be when looking at examples from the media. So here's what I've learned so far from these new topics and projects. The autism and vaccines topic has been a little tricky to talk about. I found it's important to present the science while also expressing sympathy for smart but scared parents who are really just trying to do the best for their kids. We had about 10 years of uncertainty in there where parents just weren't sure what to do. I try and give the historical perspective of how at one point we thought there might be a link between ice cream and polio because they both peaked at the same time of year. And now we know better, but again, desperate parents looking for a cure for their kids. This semester I lucked out because the week that I was teaching autism and vaccines was the week that the Disneyland measles outbreak made it big in the news with hundreds of cases from kids who weren't vaccinated. So it seemed to go over for me better this semester than last semester. Also, I found that big data can be a scary topic if you don't present it correctly. I'm not trying to make them paranoid. I'm not trying to make them, afraid of this. What I found fascinating was that when I tell people of my age, my generation, older generations, about all the data that's being collected from you without your notice, my friends and I want to go throw our phones in the Wabash River and never touch them again. When I tell my students about all the data that's being collected, they're not fazed by it. They find it interesting, they find it intriguing, but they have been monitored their entire lives. They've had surveillance cameras on them, they've grown up with the internet. So it's interesting but not necessarily terrifying the way it is for older people. And my students love that the Combos project is real instead of just a class, instead of just a class assignment. The opportunity to see how difficult it is to collect data well is important, and they needed reassurance that I really was going to hand over the data. So here are my challenges for the future. Am I spending too much time pointing out flaws in the media instead of showing what's done well? And are they going to trust anybody after taking this class? And should they trust anybody? I also need to figure out a better definition for what big data actually is. And I need to figure out how to make my group work more effective. And students were looking for a little bit longer time to collect the Combos project data. I'm still thinking about that. And Purdue has over 20% international students, and sometimes we run into cultural differences we weren't expecting. So I'm coordinating with international student specialists this semester to learn new strategies for explanations, active learning, and group work. So I am really excited to hear what questions you might have and what suggestions you might have for me and what ideas you're using in your own classes. Michelle, do we have any questions?
Yes, we have a lot of questions, Ellen,
Great.
so that was a great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks.
So we'll get started here. So one question that came up, what parts of statistical inference do you omit or minimize?
I don't do any calculations for statistical inference. I do some basic hands-on explanations using the randomization method just to teach what statistical significance is, that it's when you get sample results that are too unusual to have happened just by random chance. That's the idea I get across, but we don't actually do, we don't use the normal table. We don't do any calculations for that.
Another question that came up, do you have any future teachers in your course?
I may. It's not a large percentage. Somebody could choose to take my class as an elective who's going into teaching, but normally not a big group.
Kind of related to that question, there was another question that came up about, do you have any thoughts on proposals to teach big data in high schools?
I have not heard of any, but that's fascinating. I would love to know more about what they're considering doing.
Okay. Yeah, Larry Lesser asked that, and he actually posted a link that we can share with you.
Okay.
If you want to learn more about that.
I definitely would. Thank you.
Okay. So let's see. Let me go back to some other questions. Lots of questions here. Hopefully we can get through all of them. Let's see. Oh, when in the semester does the advertising project fall?
In the first third, so maybe about the third weekend, third or fourth week of the semester.
We had a couple questions. So one person would like to know, is it possible to take your online stats 113 without being a Purdue student?
I don't think that that's possible because you need a Purdue login to be able to get to the Blackboard site.
Okay. Would you be able to make some of your videos and group activities publicly available for the ones that you use in your flipped class?
I don't know that I could make the videos available, but I'd be happy to share some of the materials if I knew what people wanted. I could make some of them available on the website with the recording of the webinar if people wanted that.
That would be great. Another question that came up, can students take both the statistical literacy course and the introductory applied statistics course?
Yes, and that's part of what made me redesign that. All of a sudden I was getting people taking both at the same time, or they'd already had the intro stats class and then were signing up for this, and I realized I had to give them something different that they weren't getting in the other class.
Is this a lot of students that do that, or do you know what?
It's not a lot, but it's increasing, and we're not sure exactly why that's happening.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you actually how you came up with a lot of your new ideas and topics, but it sounds like that's maybe what prompted you to rethink your course.
Right. It was again thinking through the idea of my course being statistics and society needed to be a bigger part of that.
So another question, and this goes back to I think what you were talking about in terms of a lot of the big data issues. Do you or should you discuss how Homeland Security requested data from Arab Americans in 2004 from the Census Bureau, or used the 1940 census data for forcing migration and internment of Japanese Americans in the early 1940s?
I have wrestled with that idea, and so far I have not introduced that in class. I'm not absolutely opposed to it. I just haven't done it yet, and I'm looking for the right way to do it. And so I would be interested in discussing that with somebody if you've got strong feelings about that one way or another, but so far I have not.
Okay. What kind of guidelines do you give your students for good online resources in their online search part of the Big Data project?
Well, we're still working on that. I don't know that I'm terribly specific about that yet because I'm interested in where they're going to go with it. This is only the second semester I've offered the project, and so I'm learning from them as much as they're learning from me on this project now, so I haven't given them a whole lot. I mean, I definitely send them to the website to look at privacy policies, and if they have trouble finding the privacy policies, then I have them contact the company and find out why it's not available and do more search. But for actual sites for looking at good uses of big data, it's in the news every day. It's not hard to find. If you look at big data and sports, big data and health, you'll get a bunch of links.
Do you ever, or did you ever have to intervene in the Convos project to keep it from failing as a real survey?
Well, it was a little bit tricky for the students to understand exactly what Convos wanted them to do in the beginning, so I tried to clarify that as we went. For the students used mostly convenient sampling, some voluntary response, some did internet surveys for that, and so even if they didn't quite do it the way I necessarily would have wanted them to do it, we at least tried to get them to think about what was wrong with the method that you used. And with 500 students out collecting data, which we compiled into one report to send to Convos, I think overall we were able to send them pretty good information, even if individual groups here and there maybe didn't do exactly what we needed.
Another question that came up, is this the only statistics course that students in quantitative majors would take, or is this an elective or a dual requirement?
The quantitative majors wouldn't take my class at all. My class is primarily liberal arts and health sciences people. I have no math students, I have no stat students, very, very few engineering, just people taking it for an elective. So we have many other intro stats and other stats courses at our university. Mine's meant for a totally different audience.
And are there any prerequisites for your class?
None at all. None at all.
So there were a few questions that came up about the book that you use, and I know you said you use Statistics, Concepts, and Controversies. Have you considered other books?
I have, and there's some other good books out there, like Jessica Utz has a really good book. The Grusting and Franklin is interesting too, but for now this is the book that we've chosen to use.
So there was a comment about really loving the concept of preparing consumers of statistics. How many TAs do you have, and what do they do?
Well, I have about 9 or 10 different TAs, and remember they're split between the traditional, the flipped, and the online class. So my online TA mostly answers email and grades the online projects and exams. The flipped TA grades quizzes and projects, and also comes to class with me so that there are 2 of us circulating in the room while the students are working. My traditional students grade quizzes and exams and projects, but they also teach recitations on Monday for 20 students in the room at a time.
Couple more questions so far. If you want to ask any questions, now's the chance. Be sure to type it in the questions room for us, or the questions box. How do you handle controversial issues like whether profiling by age or ethnicity and security checks is good, bad, useful, not useful, etc.?
Well, you're right. It can be tricky, and you have to be very careful. So I try and, I try and get the students to look at it from different points of view, like what are the benefits for doing this, what are the drawbacks for doing this, and having some discussion, but basically trying to get them to see different points of view can help with that, and not let things get too heated. And if you have a specific goal that you want them, is there a specific learning objective for this that you want them to get out of this concept? I don't want to teach a controversial concept just to teach a controversial concept. What related to statistics do I want them to get out of this?
What components or ideas from this course would you now insert in a statistics course for quantitative majors that you might not have in the past?
Well, I think that they should be exposed to big data, whether it's the analyzing big data or where your data is going. I think that I agree with the people at ECOTS that that's something that we should all be talking about in some way. I also really like the service project idea, and having the students experience collecting data from themselves in less than ideal conditions, I think is important. I think the more you can talk about where the data is coming from and the quality of that data, the better.
Related to this, and some of our audience might know this, you might know this, Ellen, but does anyone out there know of a single intro or literacy book that has a big data chapter?
I could not find one yet. I hear rumors that people are considering it for future editions, but I also think it's going to be a really difficult topic to write about in a book because it changes so fast. Everything's changing, so by the time the book's published, that information might even be outdated. We may be stuck using online articles and staying up to the minute. I think that's the topic I'm going to have to update in my lectures most often. Did anybody come up with anything?
No, not yet. Yeah, if you know of anything, please be sure to type it, but so far nobody has said anything. And I wonder if maybe Rob Gould or Nick Horton might be a good one to ask. They might be good to ask about that issue.
Well, that was one of the things I asked them last summer, but there wasn't. At that time, maybe there's something being developed now.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you 2 more questions and then we'll wrap things up.
Okay.
Do you have a list? Well, let me go back here. So since we're talking about big data now, what is your definition of big data?
I don't have a good one, and I feel flustered when the students ask me that. The best they've been able to come up with so far, which is not good yet, is that it's so much data that it wouldn't even fit on your computer. We're talking massive, massive data, you know, thousands and thousands of pieces of information on every individual that's being measured. But that doesn't put it into perspective for them. I'm really looking for a better way to define that.
Well, I think that's a pretty good definition. So Larry Lesser mentioned we might look at Wikipedia and what their definition is. Data sets so large or complex that traditional data processing applications are inadequate. So that's what Wikipedia says. Well, our last question, do you have a list of the big ideas you want your students to know?
I have a list of learning objectives, and I have, you know, more general learning outcomes. But it's a pretty long list for what I want them to know. It goes on for several pages, specific learning objectives for each unit. But basically, I want to keep them from having ignorance foisted upon them, and I want to give them confidence to question where statistics are coming from. If their doctor gives them information, I want them to say, how do you know that this is true? And I want them to feel comfortable evaluating information on their own, and if they don't know the answer, they should at least know that they have the power to go and look for that information.
Would you mind sharing that list? There was a request if you could post the list, maybe along with your slides. Would you be comfortable with that?
I could do that.
Okay. Well, lots of great questions, and a lot of people are thanking you for a great webinar, Ellen, and they seem really excited about your course and what you're doing. And I thank you for being here this afternoon, Ellen, and all of our guests.
Thank you for the great discussion. It's so wonderful to have a community like this out there where we can all bounce ideas off of each other. I look forward to talking to you all more about that in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Please get in touch with Ellen if you have questions. She's always great to collaborate with. And also, when the webinar ends, there should be a screen that comes up where you can give some feedback. So we always love to get your feedback about the webinars. And stay tuned to CauseWeb for announcements of upcoming webinars. Hopefully we'll have some things going on in April that you can sign up for. So also, I just wanted to mention that next Wednesday, there will be a JSE webinar. And Larry, maybe you could remind me of the time. I forgot the time. It's going to be on Wednesday, Wednesday the 18th. So Larry Lesser and Amy Wagler from the University of Texas at El Paso will be presenting a paper that they published in JSE. So it'll be at 12:30 Eastern Time next Wednesday. So if you haven't signed up, we really encourage you to sign up, and you can see a link to this on the Cause website. So thank you everyone for being here, and I hope you have a great afternoon.